would happen to the one who gave his descendants to the false god Molech? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Leviticus on Walking Through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Leviticus 20. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 9. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Leviticus 20, beginning at verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Again you shall say to the children of Israel, Whoever of the children of Israel, or of the strangers who dwell in Israel, who gives any of his descendants to Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from his people, because he has given some of his descendants to Molech, to defile my sanctuary and profane my holy name. And if the people of the land should any way hide their eyes from the man, when he gives some of his descendants to Molech, and they do not kill him, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and I will cut him off from his people, and all who prostitute themselves with him to commit harlotry with Molech. And the person who turns to mediums and familiar spirits to prostitute himself with them, I will set my face against that person and cut him off from his people. Consecrate yourselves therefore and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. And you shall keep my statutes and perform them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. For everyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother. His blood shall be upon him. In the last 3 chapters especially, we've had God giving certain commandments to Israel that they were to follow. The reason for God giving Israel these laws was not because he was controlling nor nitpicky, but because he was holy. As you've heard many times recently, being holy means separate. God was completely separate, completely holy. Although mankind cannot be completely holy like God, mankind is commanded to be holy and seek God's forgiveness when we fail. Israel was to be different than other nations. They were to look different, dress different, behave different, and worship different. They were to be holy. Thus far, though, we've seen these laws simply as sins, presumably sins where offerings could be made at the altar. However, we're going to see that some of these sins were capital crimes requiring death. Some caused the person to be cut off from among the people, while others carried other penalties. The first section of the chapter deals with idolatry. The abomination of the Ammonites was especially hated by God. If you recall from Genesis 19, that the people of Ammon descended from Lot through the incest with his younger daughter. Ammon worshipped false gods, one of which is Molech, sometimes referred to as Moloch, Milcom, or Malcham. In Leviticus 18, we talked about how the children of Ammon caused their children to walk through the fire in dedication to this god. This phrase, walking through the fire, has been interpreted by many as human sacrifice, and while this would be included for sure, it could also mean that they simply dedicated their children to the service of this god. God was not going to tolerate this among his people. What was the penalty for disobeying God here and dedicating any of their descendants to Molech, or presumably any other god for that matter? Death by stoning. When God told Israel that they were to have no other gods before him, he meant it. God will not share the stage with anything that man creates to worship, for they are not true gods. The man who disobeys him in this regard is deserving of death and was to be stoned. If the people refused to do this, God would turn away his face from those who refused and cut them off from among the people. Sometimes today we're confronted with people who are in sin, but are too afraid to deal with it, for we don't want to offend someone. Well, we must always act out of love. A loving person looks out for the soul of another and tries to get them to return to God. While we're not commanded to stone our brothers or sisters who grievously sin against God, we are commanded to withdraw fellowship from them. Refusing to do so not only does them harm, but does harm to ourselves too, causing us to sin. God made a command that Israel was to stone the ones who dedicated themselves to Molech. Those who went after Molech were committing spiritual adultery against God, and those who refused to act were joining in that adultery, seemingly giving their approval for it. Such would not be tolerated by God. In chapter 19, Israel was warned not to go after magicians, fortune tellers, mediums, or psychics. We discussed how these people couldn't really do what they said they could do. In reality, they were proclaiming for themselves power that only God possessed. Those who sought after mediums would be cut off from among the people, which we've said in the past could mean that they were either put to death or they would be cast out of Israel and wouldn't share the rights that Israelites had, especially concerning the tabernacle and sacrifices. This shows us how seriously God considers this sin, something that we need to avoid today. In closing today's reading, we find that Israel wasn't to curse their parents, for the penalty for this was death. This is a repetition of what we studied in Exodus 21:17. Of course, we're talking about children who are old enough to be held accountable for their actions, not little children. But this does show us that when the Old Testament told children to honor their father and mother, it didn't just mean until they left the house. They were always to do this. Such is also true under Christ. Now, under Moses, death might seem like a pretty harsh penalty for cursing father or mother, but that should make us realize that God really did want people to respect their elders. Younger generations often mock and ridicule older generations for their mistakes or simply the fact that they're old. If we were under the law of Moses today, there would be plenty of people being put to death for a lack of respect for their parents. But even though death is not the penalty for this today, let's remember it is still sin, and therefore children must learn to respect their parents and respect their elders. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Leviticus 20, verses 10 to 16, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.